Díomh agus fáilte arás to the Crazy House Prices podcast with me, Ciarán Mulqueen, where we explore the madness of the Irish housing market and try to make sense of it all. On today's episode, we have Sean Keys of The Currency. He is a leading expert on the housing market and he joins us to discuss his predictions for where house prices are going to go in 2023, some of his solutions to trying to make housing more affordable, and I will give you a little spoiler alert. He predicts a massive drop in house prices. So get ready to dive into the nitty-gritty of the Irish housing market as we explore the factors that are driving prices up. Plus, stick around to hear my own thoughts on the recent myhome.ie report about house prices, where I think they're going to go. This is all coming up on this episode of the Crazy House Prices podcast. I'm going to pause the podcast for a second because I want to talk to you about a company called Financial Planning Matters. Their website is fpms.ie. This is a company that I know very well and the team behind it are fantastic. It's a small Irish company that believes that financial planning should be accessible, easy to understand and affordable for everyone. That's why they offer personalised financial advice that's tailored to your unique needs and goals. Their team of expert financial planners will look at your current financial situation and develop a personalised strategy to give you a roadmap to achieve your financial goals. It's not just about setting up a pension or investing your money. They'll consider all aspects of your finances to help you get to where you want to be. So that could be saving for your deposit. It could be knowing where to invest your children's allowance. It could be maybe you have loads of money and you want to know what to do with it. So their customer service is incredible. I've been using them for over a year now and I cannot recommend them enough. So check out fpms.ie. Now, back to the podcast. Now, today on the podcast, I have Sean Keys of The Currency, who has very kindly agreed to come on and have a chat with us about house prices and about maybe potential solutions to the housing crisis. So you're very welcome, Sean.
Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. I suppose if you want to kind of tell people a little bit about you, your interest in housing, kind of like, you know, around the pub talk that you would, if someone asks you what do you do, that you could tell them in under a minute.
I'm probably one of the least qualified on paper people to talk about housing. I'm basically just a punter. You know, my background is I'm studied economics, I suppose, and I did some more economics after university. So that's kind of the starting point and the way I tend to interpret and see these things. But then, like in my life, then I just went off and was working in financial journalism and writing, working kind of focused on investment and companies and things like that. Yeah, you know, my first love has always been, you know, policy and also cities and what makes cities work well. So, you know, moved back to Ireland 5 years ago and it's all about housing ever since. And that's kind of been a big kind of interest and focus of mine. So I just sprout off on it on Twitter and get into arguments and stuff. So that's my main qualification.
Yeah, well, look, you're far more qualified than I am, and all I do is talk about housing. So I think it's one of those things, like as a nation, where we've always been obsessed with property and home ownership, I guess, and that's maybe a hangover from a fair few centuries of not being able to own our own home. So I think the entire nation are kind of gripped by house prices, and that's why it's such a, you know, popular topic, I suppose. But I guess the first kind of question I would have is, where do you see house prices going in 2023? Because that is by far the most common question I am asked, and my answer is always the same. I have no idea. But I think, you know, people don't like that answer, and they do always want a little guess or a small prediction. And I think I kind of predicted during the start of kind of the COVID thing, I was like, oh, well, like, I mean, we're all waiting on house prices to come down a little bit, so surely this will be it. And I couldn't have been more wrong. So I'm always very skeptical about, you know, getting too into one side or the other, or where things are going to go. But I guess my prediction would be that they may go up a little bit next year or this year, 2023, because there's literally nothing available to buy. So that would be my guess. But what are your thoughts on it?
Okay, well, I'm going to give the people what they want, and I'm going to give a specific prediction, right? And my prediction is that house prices are going to fall by 14%. And the reason where I get that number is, so the ESRI did some research on this, and they have a kind of they use sort of a workhorse model, which is like, a very commonly used model for estimating house prices, which is used all over the world, and it's got like four inputs. And so they've been using this model for a long time to track house prices in Ireland, and it's got a pretty good track record. It stays reasonably close to actual market prices that you see, that people actually, that you actually observe. So anyway, according to that model, house prices in Ireland are currently 7% overvalued. And then in addition to that, we all know interest rates are changing. And one of the big inputs into that model, one of the four inputs, are interest rates. And if you input the kind of forecast interest rate for next year into that model, you get a further 7% reduction in house prices. So if you take the model's basic assumption that 7% overvalued, and then you add in an extra 7% for like where the forecasts of interest rates are headed, you get to 14% overvalued. So yeah, I mean, look, it's 14% is no joke. Like it'd be like, depends on what part of the country you're in, but like it'd be kind of 20 or 30 grand of the price of a house. But it's obviously there's a couple of, I'm not going to put my neck on the line totally. This is all the ESRI's model. I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah.
delivering the bad news, but that's what it would be. But like, as I said, if it's 20 or 30 grand, that would be bad. But you have to look at the rest of the world, and in those places, interest rates are going up far, far more than they are in Ireland. In the UK and in the US, they're looking at sort of 7% interest rates, where we might be looking at like mortgage interest rates of 3%, 4%. So yeah, it'll have roughly that impact here. Not good, but it'll probably be worse in other parts of the world.
Yeah, well, depending on which side you're looking at it, I think a lot of people listening to this will probably be very welcoming of a 14% drop in price. And I think what I always say is like the value of your house or the house price only really matters on 2 days, and that's the day you buy it and the day you sell it. So
Yeah.
for most people, if they're looking at it as a home rather than an investment and they plan on staying in it, for a long time, well, then a drop by 14% next year won't really mean anything to them
Mm,
after 10, 15 years because,
yeah.
I mean, historically, house prices always go up. And I know from historically a normal functioning housing market, usually for every 1% of an interest rate rise, house prices tend to fall by 10%. But I think what leaves Ireland as a bit of an outlier is the fact that kind of since 2017, there have only been in and around 6,000 to 6,500 new build homes available for URI to buy on the open market. Everything else is kind of, the state are buying up a lot or building a lot. There's just not a whole lot of supply there for people to actually buy. And that would be kind of my
Yeah.
worry as to how do we see prices come down, because there's just so little to buy. And then even that's on the new home side, that's such a small amount available. But then if you're looking at, say, existing stock, but even there, you're competing against councils a lot now, more so than even investment funds or anything like that. It's mostly the council buying up a lot of these homes, and that's taken away from existing stocks. So I
Yeah.
saw that ESRI thing as well. So it'd be interesting, I guess, to see where it goes. But like, what would you say about that issue with supply?
Well, just firstly though, like interest rates are annoying because when interest rates go up, it doesn't really benefit anybody. Like, even though, so that model is forecasting that higher interest rates would drive prices down by 7%, and you might say that's good for people who are buying a house, but it's not really, because like the way it's driving house prices down is by kind of taking money out of buyers' pockets,
Yeah.
by reducing their firepower for buying. So it's like it's kind of a wash. Like, where it's the house prices being 7% overvalued and the prospect of them falling back a bit, that would be good for buyers. In terms of supply, yeah, I mean, like, that's the big thing. Like, my big theory of housing is like, okay, in every country, housing is a very complex market, because in every country, housing is quite regulated. The government's very active. It builds bits and pieces, and so it's different in every place, and it's complex in every different place. And so when you're looking around the world to see like what works and what doesn't, I think there is a natural tendency to look at the specific policies that they have in these places, and you say, you go to France, or you go to Austria, or wherever, Singapore, whatever it is your favorite, and you can find like, oh yeah, they have a system where 30 the government funds the home 30% 50% of the equity of a home, they borrow the rest, and there's a trust, and then they limit the rent, they cap the rent at a certain level, and you get really deep into the weeds, and as I said, every country is different. And I think that's sort of missing the wood from the trees, where the overarching thing that works in all these different systems that can be very, very differently set up is the ones that manage to deliver tons of homes are
Mm.
fine. And so like it can be a system, places that can be very, very different, like, somewhere like Texas, Houston, Texas, total free market air place where they have very little zoning and it's kind of a free for all, or Helsinki or Japan or Vienna, all these very, very different places, very different models. They're places where their housing system works quite well. And the way that they all achieve it is just by supply, by like figuring out how to build tons of homes. And whether the government does it in Vienna and the private sector does it in Houston, but what they have in common is loads and loads of homes. And once you've got that, the rest is kind of detail. So
Yeah.
that's basically where I come from. It's just like what we can do to build more homes, whether it's private builders or the state, just getting more and more homes built.
Yeah, and I've spent a good bit of time in Vienna because my in-laws lived there for a few years, and a massive percentage of people there are in that Vienna model, that kind of cost rental housing scheme that they have over there. I think I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but it was a huge, huge percentage of people, and it's not just it's people that like teachers, it's doctors, it's whoever, and that's kind of like
Mm.
it seems like a pretty good model. I think another thing that I'm hearing a lot as well at the moment is going back to interest rates. And as you said, when interest rates go up, people's repayment capacity goes down. So they're not able to get a mortgage for as much, which in turn kind of helps bring down house prices when demand is kind of stunted a little bit. But that means that people maybe like, so let's say I'm on a fixed rate for 4 years at 2.1%. So my mortgage is very affordable for us, especially compared to what we'd be paying for rent around here. We'd probably be paying well over double what we're paying on our mortgage to rent the same home around here, if you could find one. But what I suppose when interest rates go up, what will happen is people will be paying a much higher mortgage, even though they've borrowed less than I have. So a monthly repayment. So one thing I'm hearing a lot now is about this kind of increase for first-time buyers this January, where they can borrow up to 4 times their income. And I guess my thoughts on that is, well, it's only first-time buyers, so it's not everyone, and then it's also
Mm.
it's that's the max they can borrow without getting an exception, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're automatically going to qualify for 4 times, because again, it'll come
Yeah.
down to your own individual circumstances, your repayment capacity, and
Yeah.
all that. So I don't think that's going to have as much of an impact as people think it will in terms of
Mm.
inflating house prices. But well, kind of like what are your thoughts on that kind of the
Yeah, it's
new?
it's it's an interesting one, like that, the idea of allowing borrowers to borrow more. And so firstly, the central bank has been hostile to this for their own reasons, because they are worried about financial stability and they don't want the banks to go bust again. Fair enough. So that's their motivation. And whenever there's been talk about loosening those rules and allowing people to borrow more, like the first objection is always like, oh, it'll just mean higher house prices. Like that won't result in more homes. It'll just increase house prices.
Yeah.
And that's not exactly true. Like it's partially true. If you allow people to borrow more money, yes, it does drive up house prices, but it also results in more homes being built. It's kind of a mixture of both. So you kind of, if you compare like our current housing crisis to the 2006 housing crisis, if you want to call it that. 2006 house prices were very high and expensive and unaffordable. But what was different back then was that credit was really loose, like anybody could get a mortgage. So it was sort of a different type of problem. There wasn't exactly a housing shortage. It was just that the prices were super, super high and way, way more was getting built.
Hmm.
That's why I think there is a balance to be had. Of course, you can't just keep turning the taps up, allow people to borrow more and more and more and more. At some point, it just turns into totally prices and you're not helping anybody. But I do think that where we had been was maybe overly restrictive. It was much more restrictive than the typical European countries. So I think allowing people to borrow a bit more, maybe yes, have a bigger mortgage, but like you'd rather have a slightly bigger mortgage on a house that you have than not have any house at all. And I think that's probably a better balance to strike.
Yeah, I think it would probably be better if there were more rentals, but the fact that there are no rentals, like well, if people are able to borrow more, yeah, their mortgage would be bigger. But like, say, we got an exception to buy ours, so we borrowed 4.5 times our income, and even at that, like our monthlies are still very affordable for us. Just because we had no other outgoings. Like we've no, well, we have a little small car loan, but we've no kind of, we didn't have childcare fees at the time. We will do in September, but I guess when there is an adding fuel to demand, when there's nothing really being built, I think that's people's worry with adding to borrowing. But then the other side of it is, as you said, we are more restrictive than other countries have been in terms of our central bank and their lending limits. But my argument would be that has saved us because our house prices actually haven't gone up as much as a lot of other cities and a lot of other countries. And I think that is down to the fact that we've kind of been saved from ourselves a little bit, like we weren't in 2007, 2008, when people were going to the pub and then leaving the pub after having buying a house as well as a pint.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
would be my argument that, we haven't got our house prices, although they have gone up. But if you look at other cities or other countries, like say in Canada or whatever, and they've tried to tackle it since, and Australia,
Mm.
ours haven't gone up as much because people haven't been able to borrow as much.
Yeah, look, it's a subtle issue. Like, obviously at one extreme you've got Ireland back in the day, or maybe or maybe Canada today,
Mm.
where it's just all, or yeah, it's just where the credit has gone into prices without stimulating demand or supply much. Yeah, and then there's the financial stability side of it. Yeah, it's complex, but I mean, I think it's you could. I'm sure the central bank could make a very strong argument for keeping it the way they did. But like, yeah, I mean, the conversation keeps coming back to rentals in the background. It's
Mm.
like what your rent would be, what can you
Yeah.
save, what would you be spending otherwise. And I think that's the other big mistake that we make in Ireland. Like rents, first time buyers have a place in the national, in everyone's heart. Maybe going back to what you said before about our history,
Yeah.
and home ownership is and it's the policy of most of the major parties. And
Well, so they say.
what yes, well they do. I mean, but they do. But like, what it means is that renters get screwed essentially. Like it's a policy that anything if that renters come second, any kind of new supply must be for buyers. And if an institutional investor wanted to build 500 apartments, they are like that would help renters. It would lower rents. But the argument is like, oh, it's unaffordable, or that they should be for buyers. If the investor is applying to build 500 apartments somewhere, invariably the objection is, well, they shouldn't be for renters, they should be for buyers. And like that's just taken as a fact, taken as a given, and it's not helpful, I think.
I think from what I see on my page, very often there's a massive phobia about buying apartments in Ireland for whatever reason. There's a fear of dodgy management fees. There's a fear of the build quality of the apartments, which I mean, we're seeing in the news at the moment with the 100% redress for the Celtic Tiger builds and the state that the apartments were built. But I think obviously now with more regulation and stuff, it's just something I've noticed on my page is that people are just really afraid of buying apartments because they generally have
Yeah,
historically kind of a lot of issues.
yeah,
And then we kind of, I don't know, maybe we're all brought up with this kind of idea of a house, your three bed semi D, like whether that's in the middle of Dublin City or whether that's in rural Ireland, like that's just kind of where our
yeah,
heads tend to go, and that's where what has driven a lot of policy over in the past. But I'm
yeah.
looking around me here out my window and I see nothing but cranes because I'm in Dublin 8 and there's a lot being built. But as you said, there's nothing being built for people to buy. And the apartment thing, the developers will say that it's not viable for them to build to buy because people won't spend nearly 500,000 on a two-bed apartment.
Well, yeah. I mean, Is it very, very slightly more or less? I'm not sure. It's basically it's almost the same price to buy an apartment as it is to buy a home.
To build.
So people choose the home to build. Excuse me, to
Yeah,
build. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
to
yeah.
build. So people choose to buy the build the. People choose to buy the homes, and builders understand that, and they don't build them. But I mean, like, the reason that these things are so lucrative, like stuff like co-living or studios or rentals, all these sort of these types of accommodation that are like quite unpopular among the general public. The reason they're so lucrative is because there's a massive shortage of them relative to other types of homes. Like we have tons of 3-bed homes and things, relatively in our housing stock. And like you're saying that you're looking out your window and all it's being built as apartments, but like there's still like massive. If you looked at the overall, the stock of houses versus apartments in Dublin City or all around Ireland, it's way out of line with the rest of Europe. We're way short of apartments, so that's why developers are building loads of them. That's why they're the first ones they go to,
Yeah.
and like that's going to have to go on for like decades really to catch up just to have enough apartments to fulfill. And
And in fact, a lot of the stuff being built around me is actually the student accommodation and hotels. There's actually not a whole lot of apartments. It's mostly hotels, student accommodation. And even the student accommodation they're looking at, I think I was looking at the website, it was like €1,800 a month for a student
wow.
apartment. Now there's very few Irish people in there from listening to the accents around the place, to a lot of Americans and stuff. But I guess that's where we're at. I think people listening to this kind of probably have a very fairly good idea as to why we are where we are in terms of house prices. And again, it always kind of comes back to a lack of supply. But I guess moving on from that and looking towards what you think we could do to try and make housing, whether that's apartments or houses, but try to make homes more affordable for people.
Hmm.
What would be your ideas on that?
I always go to planning. I'll just go to that first. I mean, like I was looking at just to put some numbers on it. There's a crowd called Turner and Townsend, and what they do, their consultancy, they're international, and what they do is they come up with really detailed estimates of how much it costs to build things in different cities around the world. And I think it's just to help inform developers. If you're a big global developer and you're like, oh look, a hotel can yield this much per year. How much it'll cost me to build one in Dublin? Would the numbers work out? That's what they do. So anyway, they have in Europe, Dublin is one of the 4 cities that they go into detail on. And take houses, they look at all different types of construction, from schools to houses and residential and commercial and all the rest of it. But like a row house, a townhouse costs 32% more to build in Dublin than it does in like Paris, Munich, or Amsterdam, or kind of an average of those cities. So it's more expensive to build here. So that's a huge problem. And so then it's like, why is that? And the other thing that they do is they look at the inputs into those buildings. So it looks at 10 different types of labor costs, 10 different types of rebar and concrete, cement blocks, wood, all the rest of it. And when you look on that side, Dublin in its wages and also in its materials are the same as European countries. And if you look at margins, they're the same as in European countries, and then preliminaries are the same as in European countries. And as you go down the list, all the inputs are roughly the same as other European countries, but it still comes out as being 32% more expensive.
I'm
And
going to
like one
guess
of the
that's down
only
to. I'm going to guess it's down to land value.
Well, no, not really. No, this is
Oh,
this is only looking at the land is irrelevant. This is only looking at the
built.
construction
Okay,
costs
yeah,
that go
yeah,
into
yeah,
it.
yeah.
So that's one of the only things that aren't captured really are like productivity, which is like, our Irish builders just bad at their job for some reason. Are they 32% worse at building stuff than other countries? And the other one is planning. And like I'm thinking planning has got to be a big factor in it. There's planning in our country. It's very uncertain. We basically have a system where the planners have a massive amount of discretion. That like the zone, the city plans themselves are quite flexible, and then so you don't know exactly what's going to be allowed in a given area. On paper, there's a very wide range of things that can be allowed, but it's really hard to know in advance what will be allowed. So that it results in like you get this, like, say this, maybe not now, but a year or two ago, you would have had like a 50% uplift in the value of the land you bought once you had planning permission.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you might spend a couple of years getting that permission. You don't know it's a kind of a toss of a coin. What way is it going to go? Once you get it, your land is 50% more valuable.
Hmm.
So yeah, our planning system, it's unusual by international standards. The other country in the world that it most resembles is the UK's. The
Yeah.
UK and Ireland both have terrible housing outcomes. We both deliver far fewer homes than are needed, especially in the places where they're needed. We both have this really uncertain system. There are other countries and other models and other ways of doing planning that are perfectly incompatible with what we want from our system, where they listen to the public, they are planned in a lot sensible, logical way, and they result crucially in affordable homes. And I think that's what we need to be looking to. That would definitely be my list of what we're looking at.
So that's top of your list. And even though there is planning approved for, what is it, 40,000 homes or something that hasn't been commenced, I guess a lot of that comes down to, like what you're saying, there does tend to be a lot of speculation on it. That people, a company or a person might buy a site, get planning and hold on to it then and try and sell it. Like there's one across the road from me on Cork Street that's is up for sale now. It's been derelict for decades and it's up for sale now with planning for, it was the last one, I think, to get the planner permission for co-living, that kind of thing. And then also just the costs, I think, is delaying a lot of developers from actually commencing those 40,000 homes.
Yeah.
So that would be top of your list.
I think like that argument gets it's up a lot. It's kind of, it makes sense at first, but it really falls apart when you think about it for a while. So there's like 80 or 90,000 unused planning permissions in Ireland. So the argument is put forward that like that shows that planning can't be the bottleneck because you've got loads of unused planning permissions. But if you think about it, right, firstly, that there has to be more permissions than there are actual than there are developed homes, because you can't build without permission. So it's going to have to be a positive number. It'll have to be some number. So then it's going to have to be greater than one. So what's it going to be? And if you take those 80,000, like maybe, so let's say some of them are just pure speculation. Some of them are with the planning rules have been changing reasonably often year to year. Maybe people are reapplying and getting new permission. Some of them, they'll be on site and they'll be working away. Some of them, the site will be encumbered for some reason. Whatever. There's that. You can slice up that 80,000 however you want in that among those. But what you're not seeing then is like how many homes would have permission if the system was looser. You know, if they think of, like, say, you know, Johnny Ronan applied to build a really tall residential tower in Docklands and he got shot down because the city planners didn't approve of it. Like if city planners were more liberal, you would have far more applications than we see at the moment. There's this huge unseen sort of quantity of schemes that would be viable and would be good, but they are from even being applied. If the 80,000 doesn't capture any of those, and then the 80,000 number itself is implausible for me, or contestable.
Okay, what would be next on your list then of things that the government could do to try and make homes more affordable?
So I'll stick with the planning, because just to go into a bit more detail on it, like the big problem is that people don't like development near their homes. They don't like the wrong kind of development near their home, and they have a say, you know, like you can't just run roughshod over them. So it's like, how do we thread the needle of building homes so that the people who don't have homes can have somewhere to live, but also not pissing off or annoying the existing homeowners too much? And there's an idea called street votes, which I think is a good way of threading that needle. And the idea is your little local area, just your street on its own, can come up with a plan for what's allowed on that street. And you could say, you know, if it's a street of 2-bed semi-Ds, you could say, okay, we will allow it can be a 3-bed terrace. You can put an extra story on your house, or you can maybe knock it and build a 3-bed townhouse on the site. And something that's sort of not too objectionable that the street are going to dislike it. And then you put that to a vote on the street, and if the street likes it, let's say if 60% of people or something like that go for it, then that becomes the new planning rule in the street. And the reason that people might think about actually saying yes to that is because if it gets passed, they have the right to develop their home at that in that way. So if you're thinking about it, if you're like living on Bird Avenue in Clonskee and you've got a third of an acre and there's a semi-D sitting on it, and if you were allowed to build a 3-bed terrace or something on it, the land and the home would be way, way more value. So by saying yes to greater density, you would get some of the benefit of that. So it's a way of giving locals the benefit of extra development in their area, so that development becomes kind of a win-win. Locals get something from it, and the people who want homes get homes. That's what I'd be looking at.
Okay. And would there be anything else you would look at? What about, say, the state becoming the developer, which is something I think would be good. So cutting out the developer say, and I know they've done it down in Cork recently. That was kind of in the news, and it's something that we have done well in the past, but we haven't done for a few decades really. which I think would be a good idea.
But
Like say on state-owned land, and they hire out the builder, they hire the contractors. But then I guess the argument is they can't build a hospital without going 3 billion or whatever over the cost. So that would
um,
be the worry for people, I think.
well, I mean, we have our AHBs, and
Yeah.
they're like they're flat to the mat. Or I think like if we had an extra 2 or 3 AHBs, I don't think we'd have 2 or 3 times more houses. I don't think that's where the bottleneck is at the moment. And like just like it's not I'm not an expert on it, and if I'm not an expert on like I've listened to stories about how Singapore and how Vienna did it.
Mm.
Look, if whatever works, if there is ways of ramping up the government end of the market, if there's things that we're not trying, I'm all for trying them. But I just think that you need to lift the blockages across the system, make it easier for both the government to do its work, the AHBs to do their work, and private developers to do their work. And I think if you did that, you'd be surprised at what the government could achieve under our current system, what the private developers could do. So yeah, and I mean, what else would I say about that? I mean, another one is just you talked about councils sitting on land
Mm.
that's not being developed. An obvious solution is to have a land tax, and we've kind of got a Maria version of it coming through, like a zoned land tax.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you just very simply had a tax on land, boom, or maybe have an agriculture, but like a very simple
I'm
anybody
just going to cut over you there,
with
Sean, because your audio is gone. You sound like a robot. But I think
oh right, hang on a second.
what you're getting at
Will I try
is
that? Will I? Do
that's okay. Yeah, I can hear you
you
now.
want to
But
try? Will I try it again?
no, you're okay. Yeah, so you're talking about a site value tax, basically, and maybe upping, say, the vacant home tax that's coming in, and maybe change that to a vacant site tax or an unused site tax.
Yeah, so they have the zone land tax, the vacant site tax, but like those they don't really attack the problem as the way it should be attacked. I don't think they
Yeah,
miss on like derelict properties. They miss all of the like wasted land that we have. Like the state, let's say you're talking about councils and state bodies sitting on land, like
yeah,
they should be paying tax to people with large gardens that they don't need. Like all the ways that we're wasteful in this country about land, a tax on land would make people rethink it and make people think more carefully about is it being put to the highest and best possible use. Now the problem with that with the land tax is it's the politics are terrible.
yeah.
The right wing parties won't do it because they're the parties of homeowners. Even our left wing parties, even Sinn Féin, won't do it because they know the politics are bad. So it's sort of one of these ones that economists like to trot out, but like it doesn't really happen very often in real life because they're so unpopular.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'd agree with you on that one. Okay, well, look, we're running out of time, and I know you've young children you need to get back to, as do I. But I really appreciate you coming on, Sean, and giving us your insights into the housing market. And thanks so much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kieran. Enjoyed it.
Hi, I am just going to pause the podcast for a second to talk to you about some sponsors of the Crazy House Prices podcast. This episode is sponsored by Daft.ie. Daft is Ireland's #1 property portal. Daft has the most properties available for sale and rent and is the preferred national property website amongst consumers in Ireland. So Daft.ie's core vision is to make buying, selling and renting property better for everyone in Ireland. So Daft's mission is to simplify each step of every property transaction in the Irish market to make buying, selling and renting in Ireland simple. That's why Daft.ie build innovative tools like Offers by Daft, an online real-time offers platform that provides never before seen transparency for the Irish consumer when buying a home. Are you looking to buy? Maximise your chances of finding your dream home by visiting Daft.ie, Ireland's #1 property website. So a great chat with Sean there of the currency, some really interesting points. I will link the ESRI report that he was speaking about in I think they're called the show notes, whatever, underneath here if you go to the description of the podcast. So I guess my own thoughts on it is these reports are all great, and I'm going to talk about the myhome.ie report. There's a lot of data, a lot of stats, but the main issue I see is the same issue that everybody talks about, and that is a massive lack of supply. There is just so few homes for people that we can buy, you or I, let's say, because we're competing against the state in a lot of cases, we're competing against councils, we're competing against investor funds and all of that. So I just don't know if I see prices coming down by much. And I know, like, if you're listening to this, you're probably following my page, that's what you're hoping for. And even me, as somebody who's just bought a house, that's what I'm hoping for as well, because it's just ridiculously unaffordable for people at the moment. But I just just can't see prices coming down because there's such a shortage of supply. Now, some people are saying with the newest changes to the mortgage lending rules, if you're not sure about those, basically in a nutshell, if you're a first time buyer, you're able to now borrow up to 4 times your gross income, and as a subsequent or a second time buyer, you can borrow the same. It's 3.5 times your income. However, the change is also for second time or subsequent time buyers is you no longer need a 20% deposit. A 10% deposit is fine, which I think is a great change. However, first time buyers being able to borrow up to 4 times their gross income, I just don't know if that's going to have a massive impact because of interest rates going up. It's going to be much more difficult to qualify for that extra half of your gross income. So I don't know. I tend to leave this to the experts in terms of making proper predictions, but I know people ask me all the time for this even. So there's the caveat that I am not qualified in anything to do with economics or any of this stuff, but you're always asking for my opinion, and I'm going to give you that. I just don't think they're going to come down a lot. I also don't think they're going to go up a whole lot either, not more than inflation anyway. So I'm kind of predicting prices will stay in and around the same, maybe drop a little bit in some places, maybe go up a little bit in some places, but I'm hoping that we don't see massive increases that we have seen over the last couple of years, and that would be my prediction. I know there's a worry, people always get worried about negative equity, and the way I think about that is, as somebody who has just bought a home at peak prices and renovated a home at peak prices when it comes to renovations, like, it makes no odds to me what this house is worth that I'm sitting in right now. I don't care. It's my home. It's not an investment. So, and I know people will always say, well, when you buy your home, it is an investment. But like, I don't look at it like that. I look at it as I have to live somewhere. So the option is to either pay rent at the highest rents in history, or have your own home and pay off your own mortgage rather than someone else's. So the whole idea of negative equity, it doesn't matter to me, to be honest, because we plan on staying here for as long as we can, hopefully forever, if we don't grow out of the house, but we shouldn't do. So we should be okay. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. I think negative equity only really impacts you on the day you're selling. So if you're looking to stay in a home long term, well, then I just think it's a no-brainer. Even if prices are high or whatever, it's a no-brainer to just buy your own home, because the alternative is to rent at ridiculous prices. So that would be my thoughts on it. And if you're trying to predict house prices or play the market, it's just an impossible game. So just don't, it doesn't matter what your neighbor paid, if they paid more, if they paid less. If you can afford the home, you love the home, the repayments are comfortable for you, well then, in my opinion, it's a no-brainer. So let's talk about the myhome.ie report. They regard it as a year of two halves for the property market, as price inflation slows marginally. Rising interest rates, affordability concerns, and overall economic inflation are set to temper skyrocketing demand. Minor house price falls are a possibility, but mortgage lending rules mean a Celtic Tiger crash is unlikely. What they mean by that is the central bank lending rules, even though they're restricted to 4 times now for first time buyers, I agree with this. I think they have saved us over the last few years because we haven't been able to borrow 5, 6, 7 times your income. Then also the cost of living concerns and rising interest rates are set to cool the skyrocketing demand for property, leading to a year of two halves for the market, as they say, according to the latest quarterly house price report from My Home. Now, they look at asking prices, and my issue with that is we really need to be looking at selling prices. Asking prices, like, I know that they have to do valuations and stuff, but some asking prices are ridiculously low and some asking prices are ridiculously high. But they're saying they rose 10.9% annually, but that's looking at last year. I think the main thing we will see will be in the CSO release, but that won't be showing what's happening now. Probably won't come up until March or April next year, because if you think about people that are being sale agreed over the last month or so, it takes a few months, 3 to 6 months really, kind of for that sale to go through, and then it takes another month or so or 2 months for the CSO to do those stats and deliver that report. So we're kind of looking at around of a 6-month delay in terms of what's happening now before we actually know and see that in statistics and in figures. So all these CSO releases are kind of, you're looking at around, at least anyway, 6 months post when people are actually on sale agreed. So we won't know for a little while, and that's where these kind of predictions are can be a little little bit pointless, especially when we're talking about asking prices like they are in the My Home report. But they say anyway, the median asking price for new houses was 320 grand, and in Dublin at 403 grand, and elsewhere at 270 grand. The number of properties for sale increased to 12,700 in June 2022, and that's up from 11,200 in March. So again, we're looking at kind of 6 months ago, but they did say the average time to sale agreed in Q1 was 2.6 months, while the average mortgage approval rose to 283,700. The average time to sale agreed, 2.6 months for a house going on the market to then go on sale agreed. That's not the time going from sale agreed to sold. So again, we don't really know exactly what the sold prices are yet, but it will be interesting, I think, and we should hopefully see those figures maybe towards March or April. But from what I'm seeing anyway on the page, people are very wary, both estate agents and buyers and sellers, and that's kind of where we're at the moment. Everybody's a little bit on edge about house prices and worrying about where they're going. So keep following the page. Check me out on Instagram's /crazy. If you just type in crazy in your search bar on Instagram, I'm probably the first thing that comes up, and I'm on Twitter as well. And as I said, I will tag Sean Keys, his Twitter handle, in the description and the ESRI report. So thank you to Sean again for coming on today, and thank you to the sponsors of the podcast, fpms.ie and daft.ie, and also a massive thank you to my patrons. This is the lovely thing about having sponsors and having patrons, because it means I can continue to produce this content for free for everybody to enjoy, and it's paid for by others. So if you want to be one of those people that joins the Patreon to support the page and support the podcast, you can jump over to patreon.com/crazyhouseprices, and over there I have a load of extra content. There's about 60 other podcasts. I do Q&As. I could put up houses there that I don't really want to advertise to 90,000 people on Instagram. Not advertise, I'm not getting paid to put them up, but just houses I find that are good value. So you can check that out over on Patreon if you want. If not, don't worry about it, because the companies that sponsor me and the other patrons pay for it, so you can enjoy it for free. So thank you for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Agus slán go fóill.